Today on The World Today. Explosion rocks the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrios Church compound in Gaza City, where many Christians had sought shelter from Israeli strikes. President Joe Biden seeks more funding for Ukraine and Israel war, saying U.S. leadership holds the world together. Plus, Chief Guterres visits the Rafah border crossing in Egypt as he pushes to get aid into Gaza. Hello and welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. I am Anne Nwawadu. Let's begin with an overview of the Israel-Hamas war today. It's day 14 and many developments continue to happen across that region. Repairs on the bomb-damaged Rafah border crossing in Egypt are being carried out on the hope that 8 lorries queuing at the border to enter Gaza will be allowed in. The United Nations has said it expects the first delivery of aid will take place in the next day or so. But elsewhere, the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem has called Thursday's explosion at a church compound in Gaza City a war crime. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Egypt to discuss avoiding a further escalation in the Middle East. Israel has announced the evacuation of the northern city of Kiryat as clashes continue with Hezbollah fighters across the border in Lebanon. And finally, U.S. President Joe Biden has said he will ask Congress for billions of dollars in military funding for Israel and Ukraine in a televised address from the Oval Office. Well, as mentioned, a Greek Orthodox church in the Gaza Strip, which has been sheltering hundreds of displaced Palestinians, was hit overnight by an Israeli airstrike. And that's according to the Orthodox Patriarchate in Jerusalem and the Palestinian health officials. Gaza's Hamas-run government media office said 18 Christian Palestinians were killed. The Israel Defense Forces told the AFP news agency that its fighter jets had hit a command and control center involved in launching rockets and mortars towards Israel, and as a result, a wall of a church in the area was damaged. Palestinian officials have said at least 500 Muslims and Christians had taken shelter in the church from Israeli bombardment. The Orthodox Church said in a statement that the Jerusalem side expresses its strongest condemnation of the Israeli airstrike that has struck its church compound in the city of Gaza. And for displaced Palestinians living in a makeshift camp in Khan Yunis, they say their current plight is like going back 50 years, back to the days of the Nakba. Nakba, or catastrophe, was when many Palestinians fled or were forced from their homes during the 1948 war that accompanied Israel's creation. She's one of the Palestinians sheltering at a makeshift camp outside a UN school in Khan Yunis after she escaped bombardments north of Gaza Strip with her family. Randa Hamuda Randa fled Jabalia refugee with 40 of her family members and food, and she describes her current living situation as harsh. U.S. President Joe Biden has asked Americans to spend billions more in dollars to help Israel fight Hamas. In a televised White House speech late on Thursday, Mr. Biden said the Hamas sought to annihilate Israel's democracy. The president, who made an 8-hour visit to Israel on Wednesday, also stressed the urgency of getting relief to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who lack food, water, and medicine. He also said that he would ask Congress on Friday to approve extra funding for Israel. A source familiar with the matter earlier said it would be a total of $14 billion.
We're facing an inflection point in history. One of those moments where the decisions we make today are going to determine the future for decades to come. As I told the families of Americans being held captive by Hamas, we're pursuing every avenue to bring their loved ones home. As president, there is no higher priority for me than the safety of Americans held hostage. The terrorist group Hamas unleashed pure, unadulterated evil in the world. But sadly, the Jewish people know perhaps better than anyone that there is no limit to the depravity of people when they want to inflict pain on others. In Israel, I saw people who are strong, determined, resilient, and also angry, in shock and in deep, deep pain. I also spoke with President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, and reiterated that the United States remains committed to the Palestinian people's right to dignity and to self-determination. The actions of Hamas terrorists don't take that right away. Like so many other, I'm heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life, including the explosion at the hospital in Gaza, which was not done by the Israelis. We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them. Iran is supporting Russia in Ukraine, and is supporting Hamas and other terrorist groups in the region, and will continue to hold them accountable, I might add.
The senior research fellow Jean-Luc Saman of the Middle East Institute, National University of Singapore, points out the key takeaways in Mr. Biden's speech. US President Joe Biden launched a new mission to convince Americans that they should spend billions more in dollars in supporting Israel and Ukraine in their wars, arguing that only the US's involvement can prevent global chaos in a televised speech.
Interesting is both the amount of support, which is going to be submitted to Congress, and the narrative, the fact that Biden is now clearly looking at what's going on in Israel as part of a broader conflict where he talks about Russia, Iran, and Hamas. So he mentions the fact that this is a existential struggle for democracies against Russia and terrorism. So this is a speech addressed to the American citizens and the American taxpayers, because Biden is basically asking the taxpayers to accept the idea of $100 billion on top of all the other expenditures. So taxpayers and also the Congress. This is a speech that comes in the middle of a major crisis. We almost forget that 3 weeks ago, Congress was threatening a shutdown of the government, and there's still no clarity on who's going to be the leader of the Republicans in Congress. Beyond that, you can also speculate that this type of speech is also addressed to the partners, so Ukraine, NATO allies, Israel, Taiwan, to reaffirm U.S. resolve that there's no doubt Biden wants to maintain U.S. support. And by extension, it's a message addressed to the rivals, so basically Russia, China, and probably Middle Eastern powers as well, here namely Iran.
And joining us now is Stephen Hayes, his former president, American Center on International Leadership from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on The World Today.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right. So what are your thoughts on President Joe Biden's speech yesterday evening, seeking more funds, saying billions of dollars should be turned to the war in Israel and in Ukraine? What would you say are the key takeaways from that speech?
Well, I think it was overall a good speech. I've looked at it a couple of times. I watched it last night as well. I think for this president especially, it was a very good and compelling speech to explain to the American public, particularly, that this aid is needed. So I am not so critical of the speech. The takeaways, I think, are the linkages, which was very interesting to me, that he also linked support for our forces in the Pacific, which, of course, is an indication towards China and support for Taiwan. So having linked that in as well makes it, I think you can't think of a better word at the moment than interesting, that Ukraine, the Middle East, and Taiwan, in essence, are all linked right now. The other point that was of interest to me was the acknowledgement of the division in this country and the need to come together. I don't think the speech itself would do that. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and we're a long way from coming together on that. So I think that, to me, those were two of the more important points that he made in that, perhaps more subtle on the other one. And I think that the fact that he didn't bait the Republicans was important too. It was an acknowledgement that there needs to be an olive branch. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going on with the House vote right now, which is going on as we're talking, for the new speaker, which is going to be very vital to Biden's interest as well as the nation's interest.
But considering the huge debts on the table for America at the moment, do you think that American people are convinced that they should be spending billions of dollars more in supporting Israel and Ukraine?
I think, well, first of all, just to answer you frankly, no. I think that that case has to be made, and it's going to have to be increasingly made because we've been involved in so many wars, and I think the American public is generally not anxious to become yet involved in further war. So I think that case has to be made. I think the president would acknowledge that it has to be made. And to me, his speech was an acknowledgement of that we've got to, he's got to make that case. So I think there's growing, and I think there's growing skepticism to more and more spending on this, but there's also still, I think, a majority that realizes that we need to support Ukraine, and certainly the support for Israel has been a given for years and years. But I think there's a lot more questions on that, and I think the issue is going to have to be taken to Congress, and there's going to be a further greater debate publicly on that.
Now, one thing Mr. Biden has said also is that only the U.S.'s involvement can prevent global chaos. Would you say this is true?
This is a tough question, and I've thought about this. The issue is, on one hand, there is a certain truth to it, but the other reality is that we're in a multipolar environment now. This globe is multipolar. It's no longer the bipolar U.S. versus the old Soviet Union and so forth. And so there's got to be a reach out in consensus more and more to global events. It can't be a we versus they much longer, if any longer. If the U.S. were not involved, I think there would be greater chaos. Our involvement adds to chaos in some ways as well, perhaps necessarily. I think that in terms of U.S. saving the world, frankly, it's going to have to be several countries coming together, if not all countries, to face the issues that we face. And that's not only hard wars, it's the whole issue of the global warming, climate change, the growing gap between rich and poor. So I think that we need more voices at the table than the U.S. But right now, I think the only thing that is preventing, it's not the only, but one of the primary countries that is preventing a greater collapse is the U.S., but it cannot do it alone. It's got to reach out, and I think also encourage far more dialogue between the U.S.-China, U.S.-Europe, and also, frankly, U.S.-Russia in that regard. Also, the U.S. and Africa needs a far stronger dialogue as well.
But we've also seen United States, the United Kingdom, German leaders travel to Israel, Egypt, and some Arab nations, actually. How would you describe the effort by Western leaders seeking a peaceful resolution to the war in Israel?
The one word comes to mind, and that's desperate. I think that the trips may or may not be necessary. I would hope that they're coordinated among the Western leaders as well on this, but I think that there's also an acknowledgement that this whole Middle East crisis could easily blow up any second into a far greater regional war, and possibly, into a world war. That's a concern. So I think it does show concern. whether it's coordinated, whether the other voice of who's involved in the dialogue as well is all important. I think it's right now a rush to show support. I think that for ending the crises, and it is a crisis. But I think a longer-term planning and longer-term discussions are needed, and certainly, finally, we need to solve the Palestinian issue.
Now, looking specifically at President Joe Biden's visit to the trip to Jordan had been cancelled in the wake of Tuesday's deadly strike, if we remember, on the hospital in Gaza. Some analysts even believe that this trip did not achieve its aim. It even risks undoing some gains already made on U.S.-Arab relations. Do you share the sentiment that it actually damaged that relationship?
Well, I think the criticism is valid. Do I think his trip was worthwhile? It was a trip to show support for Israel. He also had, and that certainly showed the support for Israel. Did he have a firm and confidential discussion with Netanyahu behind the scenes? We don't really know. Was it fully successful? No, because he had also planned to meet with Arab leaders, and that meeting was canceled, not by the U.S., but by the Arab leaders, particularly Jordan and the Palestinian Authority. So it wasn't fully successful in that regard. It did bring the crisis to greater public visibility. The results, I think, remain to be seen. Does it hurt with the Arab states? It probably does. I think the Jordanians and the Palestinians were under great pressure not to meet with Biden from others because I think that because largely the hospital strike. I think an independent inquiry is needed to help resolve that. We all believe different things, and I think I don't think that anyone is going to be fully convinced regardless of the answer, because we're so attuned to social media and different opinions now that it's hard to get facts. So I think an independent inquiry will absolutely be necessary on the hospital strike.
All right. Thank you very much, Serene Hayes, former president, American Center on International Leadership, talking to us from Washington, D.C. Thanks a lot for your contribution on The World Today.
Thank you, and an honor as usual. Thank you.
Now, during the past 2 weeks, the U.S. has been flying military support for Israel, including 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems it had previously purchased. Well, that's according to the Pentagon spokesperson, Brigadier General Patrick Ryder, who told the media that another number of artillery ammunition and another category of critical equipment will be flown over to Israel in the following days. Iron Dome was developed by state-owned Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, with U.S. backing to counter rocket fire from Lebanon that hit Israeli towns during the 2006 war with Hezbollah, and from Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas Islamists took control back in 2007, while it became operational in 2011.
And with respect to U.S. support to Israel, the first shipments of military aid, including munitions, began arriving in Israel last week and continue to arrive on a near-daily basis. This assistance is comprised of capabilities requested by Israel to include precision-guided munitions, such as joint direct attack munitions, small-diameter bombs, 155mm artillery ammunition, and other categories of critical equipment. In addition, Iron Dome interceptors from stocks that the United States has in country have been quickly provided to Israel. And in the days ahead, we'll be flowing additional Iron Dome interceptors so that Israel has the capabilities they need to sustain their Iron Dome defense systems and protect their citizens and cities from rocket attacks. We will leverage several avenues available to us to include our stocks and industry channels that reinforce the United States' unwavering and ironclad support for both the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli people. As always, the Department of Defense will continue to support, plan, and undertake these critical missions professionally and with the inherent right to protect our force.
The U.S. State Department has called for sustained aid to enter Gaza, confirming Special Envoy David Satterfield met with Israeli and Egyptian officials on the issue. The State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said the U.S., Egypt and Israel are all looking to develop the exact mechanism to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. The Israeli government is worried about the possible diversion of aid to benefit Hamas, but Mr. Miller said a concern Washington, D.C. shares. He also defended the United States' veto on a United Nations Security Council resolution that would have called for humanitarian pauses in the conflict between Israel and Palestinian Hamas militants, all to allow humanitarian aid access to the Gaza Strip. The U.S. has expressed disappointment that the draft resolution made no mention of Israel's rights of self-defense.
Ambassador Satterfield met with officials from the government of Egypt and the government of Israel today in Israel to negotiate the exact modalities by which we can implement the agreement that the president secured. So over the coming days, I think what you will see, can't get into the exact timing, but we expect it to be implemented soon, details for humanitarian aid to go in. And of course, if Rafah Gate is open to allow humanitarian aid to go in, we will be trying to get out the American citizens who are in Gaza who want to leave. Sustained humanitarian assistance going into Gaza for the benefit of innocent civilians. The exact discussions about how we implement that are exactly what Ambassador Satterfield is engaged in right now, so I wouldn't want to get ahead of those discussions, but it is our intention, our goal, and what we're working to secure is ongoing assistance to innocent civilians.
Why has it been so hard to get the Israelis to agree? You know,
the concern the Israeli government has, and they've said this publicly, and they certainly said it privately to us, is that any assistance that goes in will be diverted once it's inside Gaza. That there's not an Israeli military force in Gaza. There's not a UN peacekeeping force in Gaza. The people with guns inside Gaza are Hamas. And so Hamas may try to divert this assistance and keep it from getting to the civilians who it is intended for. We think that's a legitimate concern. We've made clear that this aid needs to go to innocent civilians and not Hamas. We're going to be watching very carefully how it's delivered because we want to be sensitive to those concerns, which we share.
What kind of protection is the United States willing to give the Palestinian civilian?
We have made very clear that we strongly support Israel's right to defend itself. We are going to continue providing the security assistance that they need to defend themselves. We think they have a right, not only a right, but an obligation to defend themselves against these terrorist attacks. I think any country would do that. But the president and the secretary have spoken to this very clearly, that we expect Israel to abide by all international law as they defend themselves. And we'll continue to work with them to ensure that they meet the highest standards. Go ahead.
Have you seen any measure by the Israeli assault thus far where it has actually taken the protection of Palestinians into consideration, a measure?
I would say a few things about that. Number one, we thought it was very unfortunate that resolution did not recognize Israel's right to defend itself in the face of these terrorist attacks. We think that is an important principle. I'm going to go back to what I said a minute ago, which is that Israel just suffered a massive terrorist attack, something that is 10 to 15 times the impact of 9/11 when you look at it on a per capita basis. Any country would defend it. I'm going to answer. I'll give you a follow up where you can make your point or answer your question. Any country would defend itself in those situations. The other reason we exercise that veto is there is ongoing diplomatic work about this very question right now, the work that Ambassador Satterfield is conducting, the work that others in the region are conducting to try to establish areas where civilians can be safe from harm. With that work ongoing and with a resolution that did not exercise Israel's right to defend itself, we thought the step we took was the appropriate one.
Still ahead on The World Today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he spoke with his U.S. counterpart, President Joe Biden, about aid to Ukraine. We'll bring you the details. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television. But earlier, Mr. Guterres called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza during a press conference in Cairo with Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry. According to him, Gaza needs aid to scale and on a sustained basis. He also called on Hamas to release the hostages it seized on October the 7th and on Israel to give unrestricted access to aid.
In the face of this humanitarian catastrophe, I'm calling for two immediate humanitarian actions: to Hamas, for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages; to Israel, for immediate unrestricted access of humanitarian aid to respond to the most basic needs of the people of Gaza. And as appalling as those attacks have been, they cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Both of my humanitarian appeals are essential in and of themselves. And to help realize these two appeals, I am calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. For nearly 2 weeks, the people of Gaza have gone without any shipments of food, water, medicine, and other essentials. Civilians in Gaza desperately need core services and supplies, and for that we need rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access. We need food, water, medicine, and fuel now. We need it at scale, and we need it to be sustained.
وده إشادة بالجهود التي تطلع بها الأمم المتحدة لمحاولة إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية لغزة، وأضم صوتي للسكرتير العام في أن استهداف المقرات الأممية والإنسانية والعاملين في حقل الإنساني يشكل انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي الإنساني.
The European Union says that 2 flights carrying 54 tons of aid for Gaza has landed in Egypt, and it's already ready for delivery to Gaza once access was possible. The aid included water, food, shelter, and sanitary materials and will be distributed by the Egyptian Red Cross. Gaza is running short of fuel, food, water, and medicine, but the Egyptian-controlled border has remained shut while various parties wrangle over the terms for allowing aid to flow in.
Overall, we are talking about 54 tons of humanitarian supplies. This includes water, this includes food, shelter, hygiene items, and sanitary material. Now, in terms of this 54 tons, we are going to work through the Egyptian Red Cross. So the aid is already pre-positioned in the region and is ready to go once humanitarian access is ensured. And in this regard, I'm just going to recall that, of course, we welcomed the positive announcements that came from both from the Egyptian and the Israeli side as to the opening of the Rafah crossing point for humanitarian aid. But we also noted that in line with international humanitarian law, there is an obligation to all parties to ensure safe and unhindered humanitarian access to people in need, and restrictions on quantity, destination, and categories of items are not in line with this obligation.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Egypt to discuss avoiding a further escalation in the Middle East with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. On Thursday, he met Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, where he encouraged the leader to use Saudi's leadership in the region to support stability, underlining the fear that Hamas attack and Israel's response could ignite regional unrest. In the talks in Egypt, Mr. Sunak stressed the imperative of avoiding regional escalation and preventing the further unnecessary loss of civilian lives.
Mr. President, thank you for your kind and warm words, and also for the time that we will spend together today. At an important time like this, it's right that partners and friends like us can talk together about the situation. Can I also first commend you for what you have done on the Rafah crossing? As you know, it's something you and I discussed when we spoke a while ago, and we believe very strongly in providing extra humanitarian aid into Gaza, and we look forward to playing an important role together with Egypt in making sure that that aid can get to people as quickly as possible. You deserve enormous praise for your role in making this possible. I also want to share with you my thoughts that what Hamas did, and I know you agree, was an appalling act of terrorism. And we now mourn the loss of every innocent life that has been lost, people of every faith, of every nationality. Palestinians are victims of Hamas too. And that is why what we are doing on the aid side together is so important. And I also share with you a vision for the Palestinian people where they can live with security and opportunity and dignity. And I know that these are all the topics you and I will have an opportunity to discuss now, and I'm grateful for our partnership at this difficult time.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is set to attend a peace summit in Cairo on Saturday to discuss how to bring an end to the Israeli-Gaza conflict. The South African presidency, in a statement, said that he was invited by Egypt's president to join the talks, which will cover the escalation of the conflict in Israel and the Gaza Strip, the urgent need for humanitarian support, and of course make a call for the resumption of the peace process. The South African leader had earlier said he was ready to mediate in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian territories. He also said his nation could draw on its experience of conflict resolution in Africa and beyond. But so far, 8 countries have confirmed their attendance in that summit, including Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Germany, Italy, Japan, Kuwait, and South Africa. European President Charles Michel is also expected to attend that summit. All right, South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has embarked on a march to express its unwavering support for the Palestinian people. The party has been notably vocal in its support of Palestine in the ongoing conflict with Israel. But recently, Palestinian Hamas militants launched a surprise attack operation against Israel, killing scores of civilians. In response, Israel carried out airstrikes in Gaza, leading to the displacement of millions of people to the south. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Samosa reports.
The African National Congress, ANC, is the latest political party in South Africa to march to the Israeli embassy in Pretoria in solidarity with Palestine. ANC's national spokesperson, Mahlengi Bengu, says the ANC has a long history of advocating for the rights of oppressed people around the world.
We are on record for many years having raised and campaigned for the liberation of Palestinian people for the longest of time. We must express our gratitude to various countries across the world that have stood up and are shining the spotlight on the oppression and the devastation that is taking place there in Palestine. But for us as the African National Congress, we have been at this for decades on this struggle.
Thousands of ANC supporters and leaders have gathered for this march, carrying banners and chanting slogans calling for an end to violence and a just resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. While the Palestinian community in South Africa says that the United Nations and its Security Council has failed the people of Palestine, they're adding that diplomacy has collapsed.
When it comes to the state, the illegal state of Israel, everybody has failed. The United Nations, the superpowers, the Europeans, the US, everybody has failed the people of Palestine. It is almost as if they don't exist, but we're going to ensure that the Palestinians speak through our voices.
There's a lot of innocent Palestinians, they kill them, the kids, the children, and the women. Now we are solidarity here. We all South African, all the nation.
If you look at the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, the Holocaust against the Palestinians for the past 7 decades, then we can only conclude that all of the powers up there have betrayed the Palestinians. It's that simple.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains a complex and long-standing issue with repercussions that extend far beyond the borders of the Middle East. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Relatives of German hostages held captive by Hamas have met with Barbel Bass, as the president of the German parliament. Ronnie Roman, whose sister Yardin has been missing since Hamas's attack, while she appreciates that the German authorities has done so far, she says the relatives need Germany to act now to get a sign of life from the hostages and bring them back to Germany. Yardin was abducted from a kibbutz near the Gaza border, along with her partner and her daughter. The latter, who managed to escape from a moving car, reached the Israeli forces after hiding for 24 hours. They have since made it to Germany, but Yarding is still not back.
We're still under this terror attack. This is not close to be ending. and we really need Germany to act real fast. We're running out of time. There's family members that we know that have kidnapped, but we don't know for 2 weeks what is their condition. We need to know. There are ill people. Maybe they will die only because they didn't get their medicines. So we need Germany to act to get a sign of life and help them humanitarian, and then right away bring them back here. We really do appreciate all the efforts that have been done until now, but we need more. Right now, we need more.
Now, still in Germany, authorities have said that they are under high alert after several attacks on Jewish institutions happened this week. Anti-Semitic attacks on the country are on the rise since this war began between Israel and Hamas on October the 7th. In addition to this, pro-Palestinian protesters have been clashing with German police. And for this and more, we're now being joined by DW correspondent Marie Sina in Berlin. Thank you very much, Marie, for joining us. Now, could you tell us more about what is actually happening in Germany, of course, in relation to the conflict between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, so tensions have been running high, particularly here in Berlin these past days. There have been a number of worrying anti-Semitic incidents. Attackers, for example, reportedly threw 2 Molotov cocktails at a synagogue in Berlin just a few days ago. And in the center of Berlin, very close to where I am right now, police formed a protective shield around the Holocaust memorial in order to prevent attacks. There were also reports of Israeli flags being torn off flagpoles in the German city of Leverkusen. And in general, anti-Semitic or anti-Israel incidents have spiked since the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas. Between October 7th until October 15th, there were more than 200 anti-Semitic incidents recorded in Germany. And that's a big increase of more than 200% compared to the same period last year.
But Marie, I mean, what has been the reaction on the side of German politicians in this incident?
German politicians have been issuing a lot of symbolic statements since the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel in order to show solidarity. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, for example, visited a synagogue. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said that protection of Jewish people in Germany is a top priority for the government. And police presence has also been ramped up around Jewish institutions here in the country. And in addition to that, yesterday, upon returning from his trip to Israel and Egypt, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz emphasized in a speech that anti-Semitism has no place in Germany. And he also said that authorities can't let protests take place when there's a risk of anti-Semitic statements being made at these protests.
On the topic of protests, I mean, in recent days, authorities have banned numerous protests, as we know, by many groups expressing solidarity with civilians in Gaza. How have police justified that, considering the fact the constitutional right to protest and the freedom of speech there?
Yeah, it's a really difficult balance that authorities have to strike here. On the one hand, there is a constitutional right to freedom of assembly and protest in Germany. But on the other hand, authorities are on extra alert for public safety at the moment. And that's due to the very incidents I described earlier. But it's also because of Germany's historical responsibility after the Holocaust. If there are fears that at certain protests there will be incitement, hate speech, or the denial of the right of existence of Israel, then these protests will be banned. But this broad clampdown on demonstrations is also being strongly criticized by many legal experts. And these bans have caused serious tensions among everyday people here in Germany. This week, for example, violent clashes between police and demonstrators took place, especially here in Berlin. In one area of the city, some protesters threw stones, bottles, and fireworks, and police used water cannons to disperse the crowd. So pretty violent scenes here. 170 people were arrested on Wednesday alone. So it's a tense situation, and even peaceful protests, including a candlelit vigil for the victims of the hospital attack in Gaza, were shut down forcefully by police this week. So again, it's a tough balancing act in the midst of a very, very tense atmosphere here in Germany.
Correspondent Marie Sina in Berlin, thank you for your time and your contribution on The World Today. Still to come in just a moment on The World Today. Top Hollywood actors offer $150 million to help end strike in the industry. Bring you the details. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Hundreds of demonstrators have rallied in New York City's Times Square to demand the release of hostages taken by Hamas during the October 7 deadly attack on Israel. This protest is coming in Times Square. It was organized by the non-profit Israeli-American Council, which represents Israeli Americans in the United States. Speakers, including U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, the first Jewish Senate majority leader in history, vowed to stand with Israel and fight back against Hamas. At the rally, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, criticized UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' planned visit to the Rafah border crossing from Egypt to Gaza on Friday, October the 20th.
When I went to Israel, the first thing I said is, Israel, America has your back. We will not abandon you. We will not leave you. We will fight with you side by side until the threat of Hamas is totally eliminated. Friends, the UN Secretary General will visit the Rafah crossing in Gaza. Right now, sadly, tragically, it seems that his top priority is giving aid to the terrorists who abducted our loved ones. Shame on him! Shame on him!
Meanwhile, dozens of protests outside the Israeli embassy in Santiago in Chile in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Protesters waved Palestinian flags, denouncing that Israel is committing genocide in its ongoing attacks in the Palestinian Gaza Strip. Thousands have been marching in many cities around the world over the past few days as Israel intensified its airstrikes on the besieged Strip since October the 7th. Meanwhile, Israelis with children and relatives believe taking hostage and held captive by Hamas fighters in the Gaza Strip are pleading for their immediate release. Hadass Calderon, a mother of two, made the appeal during a news conference in Tel Aviv organized by the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. Calderon's two children, aged 12 and 16, along with her elderly mother, were all taken when Palestinian fighters stormed the kibbutz region on October the 7th. Israeli officials believe as many as 200 people may have been taken hostage during the surprise attack by Hamas on October the 7th.
You must get solution. You must stop. All parties should stop immediately any materially operation, תתקן אותי אם אני לא אומרת נכון, act, until they release the children and babies and elderly and women and men. They must release them immediately and then make the war. You can't make wars at expense of children and babies. This is a world problem. It's not my problem. The whole world have to scream and to ask for humanity. And I think, and I pray, and I begging, and I ask even Hamas, this moment you have the opportunity to show that you still have humanity. So do it. And the government, stop fight, stop the military action. Military action, sorry for my English. And bring our children home. Now. We're waiting for them. We're crying for them. Every night we're crying and pray for them.
The conception that these are freedom fighters, this is not freedom. These are fighters, these are terrorists, and they are grabbing children, mothers, unarmed men, and they are doing God knows what to them at the moment. They need to get out of there now. Don't negotiate anything. They just need to release them, because otherwise they are lower than animals.
He was born on January 18th. I don't want to sit here in 2 months' time in a press conference celebrating his first birthday. I'm sorry. On Monday, we received a photo of Yarden, their father, being driven into the Gaza Strip on a motorcycle. He's severely injured in his head. We know nothing. We have no photos of my aunt and uncle. We only received a confirmation that they're not among the dead, and they're probably there.
Our thoughts and prayers will always be with all those victims and their families involved in this horrible war. Away from that now, leaders from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the Gulf Cooperation Council have been meeting today. They agreed to improve economic relations between them. The talks held this morning in Saudi Arabia capital of Riyadh. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, is in Riyadh and now reports.
It's been a full morning of talks between Saudi Arabia, the other GCC countries, and countries in the ASEAN region. The Saudi government says this is a great opportunity for both regions to connect on better economic, digital, and socio-economic levels, as they both have so much to give. During a press conference after the leaders' meeting, the Indonesian Foreign Minister, Retno Marsudi, said the summit was a rewriting of history between ASEAN and the GCC to improve relations and hailed the agreement to give special concentration to security issues.
Combined, our GDP last year exceeded $5 trillion and our population exceeded 700 million people, mostly young and productive. Our economic growth last year stood far above global average, 7.5% for GCC and 5.3% for ASEAN. This is a good modality for ASEAN and GCC to further strengthen cooperation in promoting peace, stability, and prosperity, as reflected in the joint statement of ASEAN-GCC Riyadh Summit and the ASEAN-GCC Framework for Cooperation 2024-2028.
Leaders also discussed the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, calling for Israel to be more humanitarian in its approach in dealing with Hamas militants in Gaza, as innocent lives are being lost.
It's a humanitarian issue. I think ASEAN and the GCC were agreeing on the issue where every person, it's not a political person only, every human being agree that we should stop the violence, we should protect civilians, we should bring the hostages and prisoner home, especially elderly and children. That's a normal humanitarian request. And I think it was good to hear the news that is beside the economical and multilateral agreements. I think it was good to have it in a political way. Also, we have agreement.
The first ever summit to be held between the two regions since diplomatic ties was established since 1990. Of course, it is agreed on improving and strengthening economic and cultural and social ties between the two regions, but they also took time to discuss the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or the war as many people refer to it as. They agreed the focus now should be on providing humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, to people who are in need of these resources. From here in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Amarachi Ubani for Channels Television News.
And finally, Oscar winner George Clooney and other top Hollywood stars have offered $150 million to the SAG-AFTRA Actors Union as part of the proposal to end the strike as it nears the 100th day. Their offer, confirmed by Clooney's spokesperson, is expected to provide the union an extra $150 million over 3 years and could help fund and improve mental benefits in the union.
So I talked with
Fran yesterday several times. And one of the things she said, and I said this before, but it's important to say it out loud because this, when talks break down, everybody worries, right? It's worrisome. And by the way, there's IATSE is here, and they're worried because they've got a lot of members that have been, 100% unemployed.
39 million hours, I think they said they've lost collectively.
They've lost. So, we get that. That's important. She understands that. And so she's committed yesterday. She said, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to sit there today, tomorrow. I'm going to be in the room to negotiate. I'm going to be there all day, every day to negotiate. And when they come in, we'll sit there, we'll fight, we'll argue, we'll disagree, we'll figure it out, and we won't leave until we get it done. And I think that's really important. I believe that the studios and the AMPT is going to do that as well.
I hope the strike is going to be effective because we're standing in the front lines of this war because we get press that is drawn to what we have to say. But we are speaking on behalf of workers all across the nation and around the world. The eyes of workers are upon us. What is decided in this strike and this negotiation is going to impact everybody. And if we don't take control of this situation from these greedy megalomaniacs, we are all going to be in threat of losing our livelihoods.
And that's it on The World Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.